The decision was not delivered through gossip, ceremony, or whispered palace negotiation. It arrived in a sealed royal order bearing the king's signature. With one command, a collection of sapphire brooches long associated with Camilla was to be removed from her private custody and transferred to Princess Anne. When the words were read aloud, the room fell silent, because everyone understood that this was about far more than jewelry. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles read the final page twice at Clarence's house. He lowered the document, lifted it again, then pressed the pen to the signature line without writing. The royal order, a formal command issued under the monarch's authority, would move every sapphire brooch from Camilla's custody into Anne's permanent care. Royal collection staff, the specialists responsible for protecting historic palace objects, would begin the transfer at once. These jewels were tied to anniversaries, diplomatic gifts, inheritance records, and the appearances that had helped Camilla build acceptance after marrying him. The king finally signed. His hand stayed over the page, as though the weight of the ink had reached the woman's sitting rooms away. He knew the order would not feel administrative. It would feel personal. It would remove objects she had worn during difficult years, when every appearance had been judged, and every symbol of belonging carried unusual force. Camilla received the news from a senior courtier in her sitting room. She listened as he explained that the sapphire inventory was being reassigned. An inventory, in this setting, meant the official record showing where each royal jewel came from, who held it, and how it could be used. She did not raise her voice. Instead, she removed the brooch pinned to her jacket, placed it on the table, and asked whether Charles had signed the order himself. When the courtier answered yes, her face changed. Anne's name appeared clearly in the document. The pieces were not being returned to a vault or held by an unnamed committee. She would control their preservation, display, and future ceremonial use. Yet one sentence carried greater danger: the restoration of the original family intention. Charles understood the implication. The collection may never have been meant to remain with Camilla. Camilla stayed beside the unfastened brooch, while Charles prepared to meet Anne privately. Neither woman knew that a forgotten instruction, buried inside an old royal inventory, had triggered the decision. The order had named the winner and exposed the loss, but before the sapphires could change hands, the palace had to confront what each woman believed those jewels had promised her. To the public, they were simply two senior royal women standing beneath the same crown. Behind palace doors, however, Camilla and Anne had carried very different ideas of duty, belonging, and loyalty for decades. Now, a collection of blue stones had become the dividing line between them. For one woman, the sapphires represented acceptance. For the other, they represented a family responsibility that should never have left the bloodline. Camilla had worn those brooches during years when acceptance never came easily. Each appearance carried judgment, and every historic jewel connected her to a monarchy that had once treated her as unwelcome. The pieces were more than decoration. They were proof, at least to her, that she had endured hostility, survived whispers, and earned a place beside Charles. Anne saw the same stones differently. To her, royal jewelry was not a prize, but a responsibility passed through generations. The princess had built her life around duty, without demanding applause, and Charles trusted that discipline. He believed she would protect the collection without turning it into a personal trophy. Yet that trust placed Anne inside Camilla's deepest wound. Alone with her dresser, Camilla opened the sapphire case and ran her fingers across the empty spaces left by pieces removed by palace staff. Her voice remained controlled, but the hurt beneath it was unmistakable. She said the transfer felt like the palace was erasing the years she had spent proving herself. The queen consort did not fear losing gemstones. She feared losing evidence that she had ever belonged. Anne felt no victory at Gatcombe Park. She read the king's written notice, closed the folder, and told her husband she had never asked to take anything from Camilla. The collection carried history, but it also carried pain, and she knew accepting it would make her appear triumphant over another woman's humiliation. Charles had attached strict conditions. Anne could not sell, permanently lend, or personally distribute any piece. Every appearance had to serve the monarchy. The order made her a guardian, not a beneficiary. Then the inventory failed. Palace officials opened the registered case and discovered that the Queen Mother's oval cluster brooch was missing. It was the most sensitive sapphire in the collection, and its absence changed the transfer into something darker. Camilla insisted she did not have it. Anne refused custody until every piece was accounted for. Charles understood that the handover could not continue until someone explained where the brooch had gone, and why. What began as a painful transfer had suddenly become a search, and the missing sapphire would lead the family back to the precise moment when Charles decided Camilla could no longer control the collection. Every royal rupture has a moment that later appears inevitable. In this case, it was not a legal hearing or a shouting match. It was a memorial reception at Windsor Castle, held beneath portraits of the women who had carried the monarchy through war, grief, and scandal. One brooch, one private refusal, and one sentence spoken too sharply transformed years of quiet tension into a decision Charles could no longer postpone. The sapphire collection had never belonged to one woman alone. Queen Mary had worn some pieces, the Queen Mother had carried others, and later brooches entered royal custody through diplomatic exchanges. Together, they formed a chain of memory rather than a private set. Yet after Queen Elizabeth died, Camilla continued wearing them at official engagements, even though the records never clearly granted her permanent ownership. That uncertainty became dangerous at the Windsor Memorial reception. Anne approached Camilla privately and asked her not to wear the Queen Mother's oval sapphire brooch. The piece, she explained, had been reserved for a future family remembrance service. Camilla refused. She said that as queen, she would decide which jewels supported her public role and which symbols belonged with her duties. Charles entered the adjoining room before the argument ended. Anne told him that guardianship could not be rewritten by rank. Camilla immediately turned to the king and demanded that he settle the matter. He said nothing. His silence wounded both women. The queen consort felt abandoned by her husband, while the princess felt he had allowed family history to become negotiable. The brooch returned after the ceremony, but the signed jewelry log carried no receiving official's name. That blank line changed everything. It suggested the piece had passed outside normal palace controls, and when officials later searched the registered case, the oval sapphire was gone. Charles acted that same night. He ordered the keeper of the royal collection, the official responsible for safeguarding historic royal objects, to examine every sapphire record dating back to the Queen Mother. The review uncovered a handwritten instruction buried inside an older inventory. It named Anne as the future custodian and warned that the principal pieces must remain under disciplined family care. The king read the instruction alone. He folded it carefully, summoned his equerry, and ordered a transfer document prepared. Yet he understood that a signature would not end the crisis. It would only force him to explain why he had chosen duty over Camilla's claim, and Camilla would soon learn exactly how long he had known everything. The forgotten instruction gave Charles the authority he needed, but authority could not protect him from the confrontation waiting behind a closed door at Clarence House. There were no advisors, no lawyers, and no courtiers to soften the language. Charles entered the room carrying the signed order, while Camilla waited beside the open sapphire case. The door closed behind him. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then she asked the question he had been avoiding since the transfer began. Was this truly about preserving royal history, or had he finally decided that Anne belonged to the family in a way she never could? For the first time, neither could hide behind ceremony, affection, or silence of previous years. Charles had cleared the room before entering. He placed the transfer order beside the open case and told Camilla that the decision was already in force. The king explained that the sapphires had passed through several generations and could not remain tied to one household forever. They needed a custodian whose position would survive changes of reign, family tension, and public controversy. Camilla did not accept the explanation quietly. She reminded him that she had worn those brooches when the country judged every step she took. During the years when acceptance felt impossible, the jewels had become armor. They connected her to the monarchy at a time when many still treated her as an intruder. To remove them now, she said, was to strip away the proof that she had endured. Charles finally admitted what he had avoided for years. He had allowed uncertainty to continue, because challenging it would have forced him to separate his love for Camilla from his duty to the crown. The confession landed harder than any accusation. She understood that his silence had never protected her. It had only delayed the wound. Then he produced the handwritten instruction from Queen Elizabeth's records. The note stated that the principal sapphire pieces should pass to Anne because she possessed the discipline to preserve their meaning without claiming their glory. Camilla read the words twice, and the anger in her face gave way to something colder. She confessed that the missing oval brooch was not lost. After the Windsor argument, she had locked it inside a separate compartment, fearing Anne would remove it before Charles made a final ruling. Camilla retrieved the key, placed it beside the order, and told him to give it to his sister himself. Charles reached for it, but she stopped him with one warning. This transfer would divide more than jewelry. It would force the family to decide whether loyalty meant protecting people or protecting history. Charles left carrying the key, but the greater power now belonged to those who had shaped the order, preserved the records, and quietly determined which royal woman could be trusted with history. The signature belonged to Charles, but the decision had been built by a network of duty stretching across generations. Archivists had preserved the note, lawyers had clarified the difference between use and ownership. William had questioned what would happen to the collection in the next reign, and at the center stood Anne, refusing to accept a single gemstone until every condition was recorded. The transfer was not an impulsive punishment, it was a controlled act of royal preservation. Palace lawyers had reached a firm conclusion. Camilla possessed ceremonial access, meaning she could wear the sapphires for official duties, but she held no unrestricted right to keep, give away, or decide their future ownership. That distinction changed the entire argument. The jewels had served her public role, yet they had never become private property. William supported a permanent family trust overseen by Anne. A trust, in simple terms, would protect the collection under fixed rules rather than personal wishes. The prince believed this was the only way to prevent the same dispute from returning when he eventually became king. He was thinking beyond the pain of one household and toward the stability of the next reign. Charles struggled with that cold logic. During a private meeting, he set down the legal memorandum and admitted that the public might see only a husband humiliating his wife. The king feared the order would reduce years of loyalty, conflict, and sacrifice to one cruel headline. William answered carefully, but he did not soften the truth. Delaying the decision, he said, would create deeper damage. Private affection could not be allowed to blur the ownership of national symbols. If the rules remained unclear now, the next monarch would inherit both the sapphires and the resentment surrounding them. Anne then made her own demand. At Windsor, she pushed the transfer papers back across the table and refused personal ownership. She would accept custodianship, the duty to protect and manage the pieces, but not the right to treat them as her possessions. Only after that clause was added did she continue reading. The revised order carried one final revelation. Catherine would become the next custodian after Anne, keeping the collection within the monarchy's direct future, rather than allowing it to vanish into separate family households. Charles signed the amendment and placed Camilla's key into Anne's hand. She closed her fingers around it, but refused to open the case. The first handover, she insisted, had to happen with Camilla present and fully understood why. The law had settled who possessed authority, yet no document could make the transfer real until Camilla watched Anne lift the sapphires from the case she had once considered her own. The handover took place without cameras, applause, or official celebration. Inside a guarded Windsor chamber, the sapphire case rested on a polished table between Camilla and Anne. Charles stood nearby, visibly uncomfortable, while two collection officers checked every numbered compartment. The silence was so complete that the click of each fastening sounded final. This was the moment when a royal order stopped being ink on paper and became a personal loss no one could disguise. Each brooch passed through a careful ritual. An officer inspected the setting, confirmed its identifying number, matched it to the historical record, and placed it inside a newly registered case, carrying Anne's custodial seal. That seal meant she would protect and manage the jewels for the monarchy, not own them as private possessions. Every movement reinforced the same truth. The transfer could no longer be reversed by emotion. Camilla then unlocked the separate compartment. She removed the Queen Mother's oval sapphire brooch and placed it before the officials, ending the mystery that had threatened the entire process. The Queen Consort said nothing, but the return of the missing piece carried an admission more powerful than any apology. The officer presented the release line. Camilla gripped the pen, yet her hand refused to move. Anne saw the struggle and quietly asked both officials to step back. She told Camilla that accepting custody did not mean erasing her years of service or pretending the jewels had meant nothing. Camilla looked at her and answered that meaning was exactly why surrendering them hurt. Anne made an unexpected choice. She selected a smaller sapphire and diamond brooch and asked that Camilla retain ceremonial use of it for the upcoming Commonwealth service. The loan would remain recorded, but the gesture made one thing clear: guardianship would not become revenge. Charles remained silent until both women turned toward him. Anne said the confusion had begun because he had avoided setting boundaries when they first became necessary. Camilla agreed. For once, the king could not allow the two women to be blamed as rivals while he escaped the consequences of his hesitation. He admitted that his silence had deepened the wound. Camilla finally signed. Anne closed the main case, but she left the smaller brooch on the table between them. That single act did not erase the pain, yet it changed the meaning of the room. The transfer was still a loss, but it no longer looked like a public defeat. No one mistook mercy for surrender. The case left Windsor under Anne's seal, but the brooch left behind opened a quieter path. One that could only be explored when the two women finally spoke without Charles standing between them. For years, their most difficult conversations had been shaped by rank, family history, and Charles's presence. This time, there was no king in the room and no official record of what was said. Anne arrived carrying the small sapphire brooch she had left behind. Camilla poured tea but did not touch her own cup. What followed was not an apology in the traditional sense. It was something rarer inside royal walls. Two women admitting what they had feared in each other. Anne came without aids and placed the brooch between them. She explained that future ceremonial loans had to be clear, recorded, and free from the confusion that had poisoned the collection. To her, the sapphires formed a chain, linking one generation to the next. They were not rewards, they were responsibilities, carried briefly before being passed on. Camilla answered with a truth she had guarded for years. She had never seen the pieces as proof of rank. She saw them as evidence that the monarchy had finally stopped treating her as temporary. Every time she wore one, the Queen Consort felt she was being allowed into a story that had once seemed closed to her. Then her voice changed. The transfer, she admitted, had felt like a judgment on her marriage. She feared she could share Charles's life, stand beside him through scandal and duty, and still remain outside the family's inheritance. Losing the sapphires had awakened the old terror that acceptance could be withdrawn whenever tradition demanded it. Anne did not dismiss that pain. The princess confessed that her own resistance had grown from grief. She had watched objects connected to her mother and grandmother become tools in arguments over popularity, legitimacy, and public acceptance. Protecting them had become personal, because losing control of their meaning felt like losing those women again. Then Anne offered something unexpected. She asked Camilla to advise the archive on the ceremonial history of every piece she had worn during the reign. The archive, the official record preserving royal decisions, objects, and service, would ensure her connection to the collection remained permanent. Camilla accepted the boundary. She agreed that Anne should retain custodianship and promised never again to remove a jewel from the registered system without written approval. Before leaving, Anne fastened the smaller brooch onto Camilla's jacket for the coming service. Neither woman embraced. Camilla simply covered Anne's hand with her own, and that quiet gesture ended the idea that the transfer had to become a war. Their private understanding changed the meaning of the decision, but the world outside the palace was about to see only the headline and judge the family before it understood the sacrifice behind it. By sunrise, the private order had escaped the palace. Newsrooms abandoned their planned front pages. Broadcasters displayed photographs of Camilla and Anne wearing sapphire pieces years apart, while commentators argued over whether the transfer represented punishment, preservation, or a change in royal power. Yet one image soon cut through every debate. Camilla, arriving at Westminster wearing the single brooch Anne had deliberately allowed her to keep using. The story moved faster than palace officials could contain it. Media outlets confirmed that Charles had transferred custodianship of the Sapphire collection to Anne, turning a private family decision into one of the most personal acts of his reign. Custodianship meant legal responsibility for protecting and managing the jewels, not private ownership, but that distinction was almost lost beneath the headlines. Buckingham Palace released a carefully measured statement. It described the arrangement as a long-term preservation decision and confirmed that the brooches would remain available for official royal service. The wording was calm. The public response was not. Across breakfast tables and radio studios, the transfer became a national argument about belonging, bloodline, marriage, memory, and monarchy itself. Camilla faced the hardest part before leaving for the Commonwealth service. An aide fastened the loaned sapphire and diamond brooch while she studied her reflection in silence. The queen consort took one slow breath and said she would not allow the public to see bitterness. The jewels had already taken enough from her. She would not let the cameras take her dignity as well. Anne waited inside Westminster Abbey, knowing that Camilla could still refuse the gesture. When the queen entered wearing the brooch, the princess briefly lowered her gaze. Relief replaced tension. Their private agreement had survived its first public test. Then one front page changed the mood. The Daily Chronicle printed a close photograph of the sapphire beneath the headline, "The Jewel Anne Took and Gave Back." What had looked like punishment now became a debate about restraint, duty, and reconciliation. Outside Buckingham Palace, a gathered crowd initially called the transfer humiliating. But broadcasters explained that Camilla retained ceremonial access, while Anne protected the collection for future generations. The anger softened. Some still saw cruelty, yet others saw a family choosing rules without abandoning compassion. Charles watched the service privately. When Camilla and Anne exchanged a restrained nod, the king understood that the order had survived public exposure. But survival was not absolution. He still had to admit what his silence had cost them both. The nation had delivered its judgment on the sapphires, but the final verdict belonged inside the family, where Charles had one last truth to speak before the collection could become a symbol of unity rather than loss. The collection had changed hands, but the deeper transformation was not recorded in any inventory. Charles had been forced to separate love from duty. Camilla had faced the fear that acceptance could be taken away. Anne had discovered that protecting history required compassion as well as discipline. By the time the family gathered again, the sapphires no longer represented victory or defeat. They represented the painful boundary between possessing the monarchy and serving it. Charles brought Camilla and Anne together at Windsor after the public service. The sapphire case remained locked inside the royal collection chamber, the secure room where historic royal objects are protected and recorded. Its closed lid made one truth unavoidable. The transfer would not be reversed. Anne would remain custodian. Catherine would succeed her, and Camilla would receive written ceremonial access to selected pieces connected to her service. The king spoke first. He admitted that years of delay had created the conflict. He apologized to Camilla for allowing temporary access to feel like permanent ownership, and he apologized to Anne for forcing her to defend family history alone. His words carried no excuse. For once, Charles did not hide behind affection, protocol, or silence. Camilla answered with calm that had been earned through pain. She admitted that she once needed the sapphires to prove she belonged. Now, the queen consort fully understood that her marriage, her work, and her endurance could not be secured or destroyed by what rested inside a jewelry case. The loss still hurt, but it no longer defined her place. Anne then made the final record complete. She ordered the Royal Archive, the official history-preserving decisions, and objects across reigns, to document every major occasion on which Camilla had worn the collection. Her connection would remain permanent, even though custody had changed. The princess opened the case and showed Camilla the Queen Mother's oval brooch beside a new inscription identifying it as royal property preserved across reigns. Camilla looked at it without reaching forward. That restraint ended the struggle more clearly than any signature. Charles's order had not removed her from the monarchy, and it had not crowned Anne as a victor. It corrected a blurred boundary. Anne became the guardian, Camilla kept her history, and Charles finally acted as king rather than husband. And when Anne closed the Sapphire case for the last time that evening, no one in the room heard the sound as a door shutting. It was the sound of a family finally placing duty, memory, and forgiveness in their rightful order. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.